Namaste, Jai Hind. The dream for a Vixit Bharat, the vision for a Vixit Bharat in 2047. And we are on the cusp of budget for 2025 and perhaps going forward, Modi 3.0, the first big budget. Right in front of me is the Vice Chairman NITI Aayog and also Chairman PMEAC, Shri Suman Bery ji. Suman ji, namaste and thank you for your time. So let's start from here, and the conversation is around Vixit Bharat. Yes. The conversation is around double-digit growth and catching up to nations which are far ahead of us. How would you explain this vision for a Vixit Bharat?
Well, I think, let me put it in two terms. Why Vixit Bharat and what is Vixit Bharat? I think Prime Minister was clear because this vision goes back to his speech on Independence Day 2022, as it happened just months after I took over this role. And he is talking about it's being both possible and a duty to deliver a developed society, a modern developed society. This is not primarily about the economy. He believes that we, or the nation, wishes to have the comforts and the opportunities of a developed society. Okay, now what that does require is economic growth, because economic growth, as we'll discuss later, makes other things possible. But he is very clear about two things. One, that if growth is not accompanied by other indicators, by a better quality of life, it's not worth having, which is inclusive growth. And also, second, that this is not a technocratic project. It is, as he puts it, a Jan Andolan. And he also refers to the 25 years from 1922 to 1947, where India went from just dreaming about independence to making it happen. And this is the importance of the Amrit Kal, which is that if we mobilize all our resources and the society mobilizes all its resources, then we can deliver to the common man standards of living which currently seem unattainable.
So 2022 to 2047, a similar Amrit Kal 100 years later, and it also culminates with 100 years of Bharat's independence.
Correct.
So that's why we've got to mobilize our resources. Now, he's also stated somewhere that it's not a compulsion, it's an intention to ensure that we are able to provide for society and to how do we do it? So let's get to how do we achieve this growth? Because you've got money in the pocket, that means you're wealthy, you've got your coffers are full, so then you can do welfare, and you can also elevate society. So how do we do that?
I would make 3 points to begin with. One is that the world is dazzled by China, and rightly so. But really, over the last 30 years, India has succeeded in maintaining growth at a respectable rate. Second, that we need to accelerate growth, and that's what we can talk about for reasons that I can come to. And third, that this is not going to be top-down. I've made that point already. And so the vision of the Prime Minister, which NITI Aayog and EAC-PM is designed to assist with, is that this needs to be a mass movement. We need to liberate the energies of the people. So it's partly a question of finding new opportunities, also very much an issue of cleaning away the impediments. And if I could just read to you what he said this time at Independence Day, he says, "Our process of reforms is not driven by compulsion, but by the intention to strengthen the nation. And I think it's quite important how he frames the target. China, for example, had as a goal overcoming a century of humiliation. Korea had the goal of equaling the living standards of the Japanese who had been their colonialist. I think the Prime Minister's vision is that we need to aim for growth for the common man. But your question is, what do we need to do and how do we get there? Let me turn to that. Let me start with the point that actually fast growth, although we've succeeded in it, it's really only Prime Minister Modi who has made that an explicit target. And I think that's right. I think the earlier formulation was that you have to choose between growth and inclusion. I think the experience of the last 10 years indicates that with sound policies, you can achieve both growth and inclusion. That's point number one. Point number two is that Prime Minister Modi has a deep belief in India's ability to master technology to accelerate its growth. And I think we have seen this over the last 10 years with DPI, with the various kinds of technological applications in government. And let me say this was new. Earlier, our tech sector was much more interested outside. So I think in exports, the outside market rather than India, I think through things like the India Stack, Aadhaar, Jan Dhan accounts, we have made technology work for us. Third, the budget the last time talked of sectors, but more importantly, it talked of, if you like, focus groups, but also talked about the importance of states and what economists call factors, okay? So a sector is industry, agriculture. A factor is land, labor. And if you want private initiative to flourish, arguably the factors are as important as the sectors. So, for example, the markets for land. I mean, these have been very complicated, and they have not allowed land to be, as it were, the use of land. It has made land very expensive. So the reform of land markets is something that has been underway. And similarly, I would say labor, I mean, the government did pass 3 labor codes, now it's up to states. And I think in all of this, and which is very relevant for NITI, how the center and the states work together is going to be very important. So the point is that growth is an aspiration, growth of a kind that can liberate the energies of the people is the goal, and both getting government as a helper, but also getting it out of the way in things like regulation. These are the broad elements of the strategy, also working with states.
Now, do we see tangible results there? When you're saying working with the states, the captain has a vision. Is the team following? Because the federal component has political opposition in play. So do they actually somewhere work with NITI? I know NITI has a governing council and you'd work, but do they actually work? The other thing, Sumanji, was you talk about this Team India aspect. Is a 6%, 7% growth enough? Because there are many who believe that we need to have already touched 11, 12%, or we need to work on a double-digit growth to be able to try and realize the economic might and the economic wealth that we need to create, generate. to become a Vixit Bharat overall?
A number of questions there. Let me try and take them in turn. First, there's the question of what we call Team India. So what I can say to your viewers, and I'm a newcomer, is that for me one of the most impressive moments in my job is to be sitting by the Prime Minister at a meeting of the Governing Council, and the newspapers and the TV channels obviously focus on political friction, and that is part and parcel of being a vibrant democracy, which thank goodness we are. But there is a deep and silent consensus on economic policy in this country, which is one reason why, the momentum has been maintained. And that consensus is evident in meetings of our Governing Council, where you see particularly chief ministers not only as politicians, which they are, but also as very skilled development practitioners. Okay, so it is a mistake to think that all of their attention is on the politics, because they know they can't be re-elected until they deliver inclusive growth and development. So that's the first point. The second point is that the creation of NITI Aayog actually was a terrific, if you like, step towards decentralization. I know that the media like to present it otherwise, but in the old days, the Planning Commission, our predecessor, used to compel action by the states through reviews and handouts. Now states are sovereign. I mean, they get funds, through, on the one hand, centrally sponsored schemes, and on the other hand, through the Finance Commission. But there's a genuine agreement or reflection that it is on the basis of state performance that state chief ministers will return. So I can say that in the interests of the electorate, Team India does work. Now we get to the question of reform, and reform at what level. There are certain things that, for example, trade policy, monetary policy, taxation policy, which are in the competence of the union government. But then so much of what matters for being investment friendly is at the level of the states. And so I think that while respecting the sovereignty of states, government has been, through various auxiliary funding schemes, trying to nudge states into, as it were, taking the actions to make themselves investment friendly. Now to come to, as it were, the economics of this. What is clear, and this is your 10% point, is that it's easier to grow fast if two things happen. First, you can raise your investment rate, but equally important, it is possible to waste investment, and so you also have to keep an eye on what economists call productivity, because there's no point growing fast if incomes don't keep pace. And incomes keep pace if productivity rises. And productivity rises when there is competition, when there is technology. So it's not straightforward. If your question is, should we be aiming for 10% growth? I would say it should be an outcome. What we need to do is to empower, as it were, the micro agents in the economy. And I would say India is fortunate in that it has a lot of low-hanging fruit. Women would be one, agricultural labor would be a second, agricultural productivity would be a third. So I would flip that around and say that, if we have been growing at 6% without exploiting these reserves, it should be possible with reform to up it by 1 or 2%. And that should be our goal.
When you say productivity, the aspect of skilling comes into play.
Yes.
Productivity in which sectors is another question. And third, productivity means longer working hours, smarter working hours, or a bit of both?
Well, it's a good point in the sense that people when people make, and they can, comparisons across the rich countries, what we call the OECD, there are two different measures of productivity. Productivity per hour worked and productivity on a kind of annual basis or monthly basis. And the interesting thing is that the US is rich because people work longer. Europe, if you like, is just as efficient, but as it were, their people, for whatever reason, choose to take their, what economists would call welfare in terms of leisure rather than work. So both of them are possibilities. I think the reality is that the great bulk of the Indian population, the labor force, are in the informal sector. And what we're talking about are debates really in the corporate sector. But Anand, if I may, I just wanted to say that there's a lot of talk also about, as it were, the number of jobs and the jobs deficit. And if you would allow me, I just want to put, a gloss on a couple of these. First, I think the Prime Minister has made it very clear, and he's a visionary in this as well, that jobs in the future are likely to be quite different from your standard kind of corporate jobs. And this is true in the West as well with AI. And so we should be talking of productive livelihoods. Second, that I mentioned that quite a large part of the, as it were, reservoir of resources is in our female labor force. And I think that they too can use technology to combine home care with other productive activities. And this is where infrastructure, technology, bandwidth all become sort of relevant. So I don't believe we should be thinking about a jobs deficit of 8 million or 9 million. Yes, it is the case that educated youth are aspiring to formal sector jobs, but the reality is that we have a vast labor force, and our concern should be raising their productivity as well. And in this, MSMEs also become very important. On skills, the government has been seized of the issue of skills for a while. I think we keep re-examining what the role of the private sector and government should be in this. I think no country has got it right, but I do think that we should also recognize what a revolution there has been in higher education and university education. And so, in a sense, this is like the cobra swallowing the mongoose, and this large bulge is going to go through the system. I have no doubt that, absorbing them will take time, but equally that, over the next decade, they will find, they will be assigned their kind of proper roles.
True. So it's not jobs but livelihoods. Is it fair to say that, Sumanji, one, livelihoods also mean that those who will not just generate a livelihood for themselves, but for someone else too. So creating more jobs as you become entrepreneurs or you start your own enterprise. Is Bharat oriented towards that?
I think more than most other societies. I mean, a great hidden resource is entrepreneurship, okay? In all countries, including India, the bulk of employment comes from small and medium enterprises. There is one striking research fact, Anand, which is that the totality of our policies have made our, if you like, large and medium-sized corporations very employment sort of leery. Our growth pattern has been more capital-driven rather than using our key resource, which is cheap labor. Okay, and so a lot of work has gone on, a lot of thinking has gone on, but tilting the balance towards, as it were, seeing abundant, cheap labor as a resource in the way that China had, etc., rather than seeing it as a troublesome cost. This is a big challenge. If I could just summarize, because we're getting to the end. So as I look to the next decade, I would say that in lots of ways, sort of more granular ways, we, in order to become a Vixit Bharat, there are three major intellectual or behavioral transformations that should guide us. One is, and the Prime Minister has spoken of this, the relationship between the citizen and what the state. Okay, right. And as he said, that we still have the afterglow of a colonial state. I've had the privilege of living in the Netherlands, and I've seen for myself what it means for a state to be oriented towards the interests of the citizen rather than, as it were, disempowering the citizen. So that is a very important transition. You can call it administrative reform, or you can call it, yeah. The second is the relationship between our enterprise sector and government. I'm sorry that, whereas the Indian corporate sector in particular has done extremely well, somehow there is perceived to be a kind of stigma or a taint in there being perfectly healthy interactions between the private sector and the government, yet we know that our private sector is a resource to be used. Okay? And so I think the notion of interactions between government and the private sector not being under some kind of a cloud, we've got to be working on this. And the third point is our relationship with the rest of the world. I mean, we're soon going to be the third largest economy in the world. And that provides opportunities, responsibilities. I think we're going to see with the change in geopolitics that more of those responsibilities will be coming our way. It gives us negotiating power. The size of our economy gives us negotiating power. So I just wanted to say that as we approach the budget, thinking about what additional steps we are taking in each of these directions would be one way to think about reform.
Two questions, final two. One is looking internally, where you said that skilling is something that the government has looked at. The budget needs to fix how we work well with the private sector and enterprise. But there is an issue there. When we say that we want the labor force to be more productive, but when we are handing them doles or trying to give them a minimum guarantee in terms of income, or putting money in their accounts, is it making them a lazier workforce? How would you see that argument? How do I ensure that I skill the workforce, make them work hard, and pay them, handsome returns? how do we do that? Are we stuck somewhere there between this entire Revdi welfare economics versus a capitalist-oriented outlook where the harder you work, the more you earn?
Well, I think that's certainly the vision of the Prime Minister. And I think it was where he made the point, which is a very insightful point, which is that, and I see this around me, that, India grew great in its, 5,000 years or 2,000 years by embracing risk, and that an aspirational society, which is what we have now, aspirational youth, means that people should be not smothered by being protected from risk, but should be allowed to, as it were, embrace risk. And I think that that is, to some extent, closer to the US mindset. And the question then is, how do you reconcile that with inclusion? And the response of this government over the last 10 years has been to provide some social safety nets. Now, you talked about doles and theories. We've just come out with a fiscal health index. I think the progress that's been made, Anand, is that state chief ministers, who are very important in this, know that they will not be able to deliver on the long run, in the long run, if the treasuries are bankrupted in the short run. So I come back to the crucial insight of the Prime Minister, which NITI Aayog is privileged to implement, which is this concept of cooperative and competitive federalism. So, when states see other states going ahead, and we come out with league tables, fiscal league tables, sustainable development goals, the idea is to put the pressure back on the state chief ministers. And, there are chief ministers who have been kind enough to call on me who said that, look, we made these promises, but the treasury is empty, and so we're trying to stretch them out. This is how the system should work in a democracy, and it does.
How insular is Bharat to geopolitical changes? So from a deep-seek upturning the entire US markets to the Russia-Ukraine war impacting supply chains, access to fertilizer or wheat, to what's happening in the Gulf with Israel and the Iran conflict and, our sea routes getting impacted, Taiwan and China and what's happening in the South China Sea. These are all trade routes. These are all markets from where we import or to markets that we feed or we send to. How much are we insulated, or how much is this going to affect our growth story?
Well, we are 1/5 of humanity, and and we are less connected with the rest of the world than we probably should be, except in one very important and often neglected dimension, which is our human resources. We are the largest exporter of, human talent in the world, and our balance of payments benefits from that. So I think there can be three responses. PM's response has, of course, been Atmanirbharta, which is to say that you only have leverage if you have capacity. And there was a sense that we had let our capacity get eroded and it needs to be rebuilt for leverage. Okay? The second is, sort of outright bans, which is to some extent the way the US started to go with China on EVs, etc. that can be expensive in terms of both productivity and taxpayers' money. The third, which I prefer, is to diversify. Okay? So, and again, it comes back to having negotiating power and leverage. Okay? What is clear is that productivity depends on, amongst other things, having access to the latest technology, and that latest technology comes to you if you, amongst other things, are open to, as it were, multinational investment, become a part of what we call global value chains. NITI has done a lot of work on global value chains. So I think that it's a matter of balance, but, you know, and part and parcel of this is for us to have our own capabilities in technology, so people can't dictate to us. So it's complicated, but I think, you know, this is, it's a complicated world, but I think we're in a good place.
We're in a good place. So is this budget going to be a big bang budget, something in it for everyone, or is it just going to continue on the same path?
That's something that
I'm saying from your perspective.
No, what I would say is the following, that it is clearly an important budget at an extraordinary moment, which is the Prime Minister's, his government's third term. And we've been building up to this ever since 2022 with the announcement of Vixit Bharat. Now, no parliament can commit its successors, okay? So it's unlike, you know, the Chinese government, which can talk confidently of a 15-year plan, etc. So if there is, and I believe there is, a desire to transform India as part of the Vixit Bharat journey, this is not a bad time to set out your stall, as it were. And those are the filters by which I'll be looking at the budget.
So you're not tempering expectations, but you're also not saying don't keep your hopes high up too much.
Well, because the hopes of each person will be different. You know, my hopes are colored by the job I have. I mean, I'm also a taxpayer. I'm also an Indian. And but you made the point about the middle class. I do think, though, that if you like, the animal spirits of our corporate sector are very important for where we want to go. And I think for them to both have carrot and stick will be a very interesting balance to see in the budget.
Mm-hmm. Okay, final question. And you are the person who sits right next to the Prime Minister, so that's why I'm asking you this. Did the results of June 2024 force a recalibration or rethink in terms of the aggressive pursuit of this vision? Did the government and the Prime Minister take the foot off the pedal a little?
Well, you know, that's a bit like the when did you stop beating your wife question. And but, you know, honestly, look, if you look at what was actually achieved, you know, in the 100 days, I mean, it's on the, you know, on the MyGov website. I don't think so. Let me, though, make a point which is related to the, let me make 2 points which are related to the outside world. I mean, I returned to India 25 years ago, and I can tell you, Anand, that this is not, as it were, just a fiction of the government's making. Particularly since our G20 presidency, and I go to the UN and for the government, you know, India is seen as a country that matters. Okay, it's consequential, and as I said, with that comes responsibility. And I was going to say that it's not only what's been happening on the domestic front. Just see, in a sense, how active and indeed aggressive the Prime Minister's diplomacy has been. Please note what has happened, in terms of the thaw with China. So at his level, economics and geopolitics have to come together. Yeah. And I think that perhaps more than most countries, we are reasonably well placed with the uncertainties that lie ahead. And I think, I don't want to be, as it were, confusing your viewers. We must both manage risks and go for growth. And so that's that's known as economic management. We came out of COVID as the fastest growing major economy, and let's see if we can negotiate this year and maintain that, because that is, in a sense, what would really make people feel that you can bet on India.
You miss Bibegda?
I do, yes, and I'm in his office. And I must say the productivity of the Economic Advisory Council, because they had a slightly different way of engaging with the Prime Minister, has been impressive, and it's a big responsibility, but I'm honored that Honorable Prime Minister decided to entrust me with it.
Well, I wish you all the very, very best, and you are playing a key role in trying to actualize and realize the vision that's been set for all of us as the people of Bharat. Sumanji, thank you very much for your time.
No, and thank you for your time. Always a pleasure.